Witnessing to unsaved family members. To be an effective Christian witness to unsaved relatives, we are to live consistent Christian lives. Here's Gene.
From somewhat of a superficial point of view, you say, where in the world does that come from? Well, you have to see the whole story of Moses and how this unfolds to this point, and we'll show you that. Let's pick up with Exodus chapter 18, verse 1. Now remember, we're back at Mount Sinai. We're back really where Moses was called by the burning bush. He was there in the wilderness for 40 years. He went back, and Aaron met him. Then together they confronted the Pharaoh, led the children of Israel out of Egypt, across the Red Sea, into the wilderness settings that we've just looked at. And they're now coming back, as it were, full circle for Moses, back to Mount Sinai. So we read, Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, the priest of Midian. Let me just comment now on Jethro. Jethro is a descendant from Abraham. However, his mother was Keturah, and Keturah was the second wife of Abraham after Sarah had passed away. And he, at this point in time, is the priest of Midian, which means that he is not a worshiper of the one true God, as his father Abraham was, but he's back into paganism like his father Abraham once was, being a Midianite. And you'll see that he worshiped false gods. He did not worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of his grandfather, his great-grandfather, Abraham. So Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, the priest of Midian, heard about everything that God had done for Moses and his people Israel, and how the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. By the way, the word spread. Even in this wilderness setting, the word spread. In fact, you will find when you get all the way into the land of Canaan, into the story of Joshua, when they went into Jericho, that the prostitute Rahab, who by that time I think had changed her profession, said, "We have heard about everything that God did in leading you across the Red Sea and out of Egypt." That's 40 years later, because they had wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. So the word has spread even in various ways, and Jethro, the father-in-law of Moses, had heard about all these things that God had done. So Moses' father-in-law Jethro, along with Moses' wife and sons. In other words, when Moses went back into Egypt, he left his wife and he left his sons with his father-in-law. And they came to him in the wilderness where he was camped at the mountain of God. Now, it's very interesting because you follow the unfolding of what happened in Jethro's life. We read here, Jethro rejoiced over all the good things the Lord had done for Israel when he rescued them from the Egyptians. What happened was, when they met, when they fellowshiped, when they talked, Moses recounted everything, filled in the gaps, filled in the blanks, as it were, on the things that Jethro didn't know. He had heard the general story, but you can imagine the excitement as Moses shared this. And Jethro is listening, and he's rejoicing, and here's a very important response. In Exodus 18, 9-12, "Blessed is the Lord." Now, this is a priest of Midian. This is a man who worships false gods. This is a religious leader who's worshiping false gods. He is a priest. And he hears the story of what God did. And so he said, "Blessed is the Lord," Jethro explained, "who rescued you from Pharaoh and the power of the Egyptians and snatched the people from the power of the Egyptians. Now," he says, "I know that the Lord is greater than all gods." Now, at this point in time, I think we would need to say that Jethro doesn't have full knowledge, but he does know that this God is separate from the gods he's been worshiping. And he acknowledges this. Now, my personal opinion is this was his moment of faith. This was probably his moment of justification before God, because he really responded to the light that he had, the miracles that had happened. And so he believed in God. I now know the Lord is greater than all gods, because he did wonders at the time the Egyptians acted arrogantly against Israel. This had to be God. And then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and sacrifices to God. And I think that that is one of the tests. That's one of the true signs that this man had put his faith in God, because he brings a burnt offering and he sacrifices to God. And Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat a meal with Moses' father-in-law in God's presence. Now, one of the things that I want you to think about and understand as we go back in the story, when God called Moses to leave Midian, to leave this area, and to go back to Egypt after these 40 years, he's got an issue. The issue relates to the fact he's got a wife, he's got 2 sons, and if you go back into that story, obviously he left them behind, but if you go back into that story, one of the things he did is he went to his father-in-law and he explained everything. And he really sought his permission, as it were, to go back and saying, God has called me. And Jethro accepted the story and blessed him. Now, what I'm simply pointing out is that Moses was sensitive to his father-in-law, before this event, and communicated. And I think that was a very important point in relationship to helping his father-in-law eventually, at this moment, come to faith in God, when he met Moses there at Mount Sinai, along with bringing his family. Let me give you an illustration of this in the New Testament, of this principle that we're looking at. And this relates to wives who are married to unsaved husbands. It's just an illustration of what God can do through consistency. Wives, in the same way, submit yourselves to your own husbands, so that even if some disobey the Christian message, and really the implication there is they don't even believe the Christian message, that they may be won over without a message by the way their wives live. In other words, a verbal message saying, you need to be saved, but rather living out what it means to be saved in that particular situation. That they're won over without a message by the way their wives live when they, what? Observe your pure, reverent lives. The reason I choose this as an illustration, in a sense, is this is exactly what happened in the life of Jethro, the father-in-law of Moses, when he not only heard the message, but he saw what happened in Moses' life when God called him there at the burning bush to go back into Egypt. So the principle simply reads, in order to be an effective Christian witness to unsaved relatives, we are to live consistent Christian lives. And that's very, very important. It's very foundational, obviously, to communicate with unsaved family members. The question for a reflection response is, what are some of the major barriers we face in our culture when attempting to share the gospel of Christ with unsaved family members, and how can we overcome these barriers? Well, one of the barriers, and we have a little saying, familiarity breeds contempt. And one of the problems we have is when we're within a family setting is to try to share within this very familiar family setting, which oftentimes brings resistance, simply because of the familiarity, because of the intimacy, because of the family situation. I think we need to be aware of that. It's an unfortunate reality that sometimes happens. There's a second thing that I try to point out to people who become believers and they want to witness to their unsaved parents. And just imagine what your parents feel, your unsaved parents feel, when you come to them, and especially they feel this if they're religious but not saved, and you come and you say, I'm saved, and I've become a believer, I've become a true Christian. What does that do to an unsaved parent? It makes them immediately defensive, feeling like they've been a failure in rearing you as one of their children. What did I teach you? The thought will go through their mind. We took you to church, or we had you baptized, or we did this, or we did that, or we tried to live consistent life. And then, of course, if they say that, and you come back and say, but Dad, it's not our works. Now the preaching is rejected. There's threat. And so I think sometimes we need to realize why the reaction. How can we approach this situation without threatening parents? Because they're going to be threatened. And I've seen that happen frequently, particularly within our cultural situation. I think there are times when we simply have to back away and pray. Back away, be consistent, and pray. And really trust God to use somebody else other than ourselves to communicate that message. At times, that is necessary. I think we just need to understand those dynamics. One of the good things that comes out of the story, I think, of Moses and his father-in-law is the consistency that Moses' father-in-law saw in his son-in-law that helped build the bridge to his coming to faith in God, the consistent life that he had lived. And that's why the principle reads, and let me just restate it, in order to be an effective Christian witness to unsaved relatives, we're to live consistent Christian lives. And sometimes that may simply mean that there were times in our lives that we were very inconsistent, we were very worldly, we were very insensitive, we were very disrespectful, and one of the places that we need to start with is simply say, please forgive me. Please forgive me for what I was like before I put my faith in Jesus Christ. And many times that will break down the barrier and build the bridge to sharing with family members.